Okay, now that you know what we're about to cover, let's go ahead and begin by talking about the three different roles that converge when it comes to theming in Drupal: the developer, the themer, and the designer. And we'll work backwards here from the typical design process of building a site. It begins typically with a designer that builds a graphical representation of the site and of specific aspects of the user interface. These graphical representations can help encapsulate a lot of information and become a useful tool when communicating with clients about the end functionality of the site, and also, if this is an internal project, using it as a virtual prototype to build out whatever parts might be missing and to identify those parts. The next step is to pass those designs off to the themer, who takes care of converting it into HTML and CSS, HTML being the structure of the information on the page, and the CSS taking care of the visual representation of it. So the colors, the layout, things like that shouldn't be part of the markup itself. Meanwhile, the developer is building out the logical side of things, taking care of programming any components that need to take data and convert it into some other type of representation. For example, we might need the developer to take an image and add an overlay to the image, or to take a list of content that's in the database and represent that in such a way that it can be handed off to the themer to take care of actually visually presenting that to the end user. This division of labor makes a lot of sense when it comes to splitting up tasks based on particular skill sets. The designer, for example, knows how to use graphic design programs. They have a sense of design as well as the ability to create a workable user interface graphically, whereas the themer understands how to structure HTML and CSS so that it renders well across multiple browsers, and they're familiar with the intricacies of those languages or syntaxes. And the developer learns how to build the components that are responsible for accepting, storing, and delivering data to that theme layer. This is how things would be structured in an ideal world, but the division of labor is very often not that clear. For example, the designer needs to have an idea of the capabilities of Drupal, where its strengths are and where its weaknesses are, in order to build a design that can be effectively themed and coded. When it gets passed off to the themer has a very interesting role because they straddle this world between the designer and the developer. In a lot of cases, they'll end up taking this design and coding it into HTML and CSS. But if you've ever had a chance to look at the actual code in a theme, you'll notice that there's a lot of PHP interspersed there, or logic inside of the code itself. For example, to conditionally display a certain bit of output based on certain conditions. For example, there is actually content in a PHP variable, or a user has a particular role, or the page is the front page versus other pages on the site. And so this logic, which would ideally be part of the developer's role, gets sort of pulled into the themer's role too, and they need to understand the basic syntax of PHP, and to do some of the aspects of theming, which sometimes require overriding existing theme functions or template files, some additional PHP coding is necessary that's outside of the basic syntax of the theme layer or PHP template coding. The role of the developer also overlaps that of the themer in a lot of ways for the same reasons, that the logic is very hard to separate in certain cases from the output. For example, when a developer creates a function that's supposed to generate some output, they're also going to build a theme function or a template file that's responsible for the base output for that logic. In some cases, the output will be overridden by a themer, but in a lot of cases, the intentional output of the logic is the one that's kept throughout the actual presentation of the site. What all of this points to is a clean conceptual break between the different roles of designer, themer, and developer, But knowing that there is a fuzzy line between them when it comes to practical implementation is going to help you understand the ambiguity that you face when you decide where you're going to put your code, where you're going to make your changes, and how you take care of modifying the output of Drupal. It's not an easy task, even for the people who have been using Drupal for many years. This separation also implies that there's at least 3 people doing the work of any given site. And in a lot of cases, that's just not practical. If you're a freelancer, a single-person shop, or you take on multiple roles in the company that you work for, then you're going to find yourself taking on all 3 of these roles at various points. Even though you might be taking care of everything from designing the site to building the logic behind the site, it's important to respect this division of labor as much as you possibly can, because any site can grow and expand to the point where there are multiple people who can work on the site who have different skill sets. Not only that, but this division is considered a best practice when it comes to Drupal development and site building. And so if you become part of a team developing Drupal sites, this type of separation will happen naturally. Also, if you're a freelancer and you're plugging into other Drupal projects, understanding the structure will allow you to be able to easily plug into other projects where the structure is being used. If you contrast code that is cleanly separated between the theming layer and the development layer with code that's tightly integrated, so the output is integrated in with the logic, you'll see that it's very difficult to make changes to the output because an understanding of that logic is necessary. Now, this comes into play not only when working with somebody else's code, but if you're a developer, you know that over time, your code becomes more difficult to understand because you're further away from your mindset when you originally coded it. So this also allows you to cleanly change the output even though you don't necessarily understand the logic behind where that output is coming from.